In my books, specifically in the book, How to Overcome the Archon Through Alchemy, I mention vampiric inorganic beings that feed on humanity. I have tried to give a good general explanation as to what these predatory beings are and how they consume human vitality. But I have never given a detailed explanation as to what the Great Archon is, or when it may have arrived on this earth. Generally, I have taken this stance, because in my books I am far more interested in providing objective ways to overcome these predatory beings. I personally feel that there is a great deal of information on these beings out there already, but very little, actually nothing of great note in my opinion really, as to how to combat this predatory force. I have been asked though, through a comment on my website, to give more detail on this subject if I can. Specifically, the commenter wanted to know if I could elaborate and give a better description of these beings, whether I am referring to the same beings that are spoken of in the Nag Hammadi texts, and whether these predatory non-organic beings precede humanity on this earth. I must begin by saying that answering these questions is a most difficult thing to do. I could use simple yes or no answers, and simplistic three-dimensional concepts that are generally the norm when modern people speak of these things. Unfortunately, such descriptions, and the answers contained therein, do not explain things properly, and in actuality these responses, I feel, create more confusion and cloud the subject matter more than they help. This is so because oftentimes, I actually feel that these answers establish even greater psychological limitations and delusions, that hinder more than they help in the true understanding of this subject. In olden times, a different linguistic symbology could be used freely, that was very good at dealing with things that are beyond physically sensual comprehension and perception. In the modern era, such symbology and mythic conceptions are not really possible, because the modern rational mind finds it difficult to truly accept and therefore understand what is being discussed using metaphor, symbols, story, and faith, using the old mythic norms. As such, we the people of this modern age need to conceptualize and discuss these supra-sensual topics using modern concepts and modern logic. In my book, Out-of-Body Experiences Quickly and Easily, I have tried to use new concepts in order to write this book. I have borrowed from quantum mechanics and more modern psychological concepts in order to try and explain the world beyond the physical body. This world, this different plane of existence outside of the physical body, is for the most part beyond the physical senses, and is therefore beyond the objective rational framework that most consider being the only place where bedrock truth, true reality, exists. Those that still cling to the unbending concept of reality as a hard mechanical world, should note though that modern science, through much effort, has now been able to prove that the three-dimensional world that most consider to be the only real world, is quite simply an illusion. An illusion created by limited sensual capacity. This illusion is like a very real, and very persistent mask, that hides a deeper truth. It hides a vast universe that exists just beyond this plain, sometimes drab world, that we call unshakable reality. When I speak of the Great Archon then, I am speaking of something that is quite simply beyond regular sensual perception, and for this reason, most definitely beyond simplistic concepts of time and space. Please note though that this does not mean that the Great Archon and his host are not real. They are as real as any bus that may hit a poor pedestrian on the street, and the effects of this predatory force are as plainly apparent to those that can see, as any economic collapse, war, elite cabal, or mountain that may stand in the way of any human traveler, as he or she makes their way through this earth. Using this modern linguistic symbology, based on modern scientific understanding, this Great Archon then can be seen as a cloud, or a swarm, of megalithic proportions. A being so huge that its size cannot be contained, or measured by trying to conceive its scale using what may be termed physical, proportions alone. This predatory force then is multidimensional, existing in multiple places in time and space, that encompass both this plane which most refer to as the only real and physical world, and also other planes of existence that are beyond current human measure. As many know, we humans are also multidimensional beings, in that our complete essence, our spirit or greater being, also exists in multiple places at once. The difference though is that this archonic force is much bigger and far more cohesively aware of the whole of itself, than any one particular human being, or for that matter, the whole of the combined human race. The Great Archon is coherent and aware of the whole of itself, in all of its dimensional realities, unlike us. And it, and the host of it, feeds in a predatory manner wherever it is. Moreover, its intellect, not being bound by time or space, is truly of titanic proportions as well. And unfortunately for us, this intelligence is most ardently focused upon its predatory machinations. With that general introduction, we may say that the Great Archon is a colossal non-organic life form. By non-organic, I mean that to us, as we measure life in this physical plane, it is not a biological life form. It is instead an energetic superpersonality, which could best be thought of as a dark purple-like energy cloud, of huge proportions. A kind of galactic cloud, or shadow, that is one giant aware essence, but that is also a swarm. It is both one thing, the Great Archon, and many things, the host. To conceive of this, think about the fact that you are yourself, you are you, one being, one personality. Now also imagine that every single cell in your body is a separate being, independent, like a small drone driven towards a purpose by the whole of all the cells that make up your body. This swarm of existence that is the whole of you, is both one large super being, and a legion, which is sometimes referred to as the host. The purpose of this swarm is to feed, to expand, and to become more cohesive, more whole. The cells of this super being, the host of the Great Archon, have infested this earth. In our plane of existence, they have been given many names, and many forms by those that have been able to see it. The earliest names as far as I know for this host, which are symbolic words, representing what the host may look and feel like to those humans unfortunate enough to be able to witness their deeds, has usually been the term the shadows. They have been seen as demons or as large shadow fish that surround this planet, and buzz around it very much like a giant swarm of black insects. In the Gnostic library, the Nag Hammadi, this shadow swarm I believe has been compared to a host of robot-like beings, which can be also described as the demons of wormwood that poison the hearts and minds of humanity. Through the progression of time, these beings, the host of the Great Archon, have been given many names and have become the myth of many nations. Everything from demons, fairies, gods, to which sacrifices were offered, to more modern interpretations where they have become reptilian overlords and grey aliens. Please note here that I personally do not believe, or advocate the idea that all grey aliens, all fairy folk, and all such inorganic multidimensional existence is just the archonic host. The world is infinite, the dark sea is vast beyond measure, and within it exist a plethora of beings that we humans interact with on a regular basis, whether most are aware of this fact or not. But our inability to perceive the world correctly, which is a result of the many machinations instigated by the Great Archon, as discussed in the first book that I mentioned earlier in the video, has us incorrectly presupposing that one thing is another thing, and that one cause is from only one possible and certain effect. This is the great deceit of the demiurge, which is the Great Archon himself and the archonic host. As it is mentioned in the hypostasis of the archons, our contest is not against flesh and blood, rather, the authorities of the universe and the spirits of wickedness. But here again we must take note, because most of us would agree that this is indeed a wicked host for us humans on this plane. But the Archonic force is not an all and ultimate evil, it is a predator, as we are predators, and its existence is part of the great balance of the cosmos. Unfortunately for us though, in this instance, the prey that it seeks is us. But this does help us to begin to understand and contemplate the question, when did the great Archon arrive, and was it here before man? To answer this question, it must be realized first of all that man has been on this earth for far longer than most currently believe, and perhaps even more astounding, that the race of man is multidimensional. That is, it exists in other planes of existence, other probable Earths, and engages in other probable pasts and future scenarios. This means that men exist in other dimensional worlds, and in those dimensional worlds those men may seem to have existed for millennia, and their civilizations may be far more advanced than our own. But wherever man is, so is the Archon to one degree or another, and wherever sentience is, as we may understand the term, so is the Archon, because it is the great Archon that is responsible for what we call sentience to a great degree. So the answer to the question of who came first, man or the Archon, then from my understanding, if we think of man as man the sentient being, as we define sentience in this modern world, then such a man did not exist before the great Archon. The Archon and his host are responsible for humanity as we see it today, and since modern man cannot see a past, or for that matter a future, where humanity is anything but a rationally bound techno-ape, then there is no humanity without the Archon. Modern man and the great Archon are bound. The great failures of the egoistic mind will not be overcome completely until the great Archon is vanquished. But if we can one day develop a far greater understanding of awareness, and what sentience might mean outside of the ego-bound consciousness, then we may vanquish the Archon, and discover that we can become a new type of being, one whose powers and freedoms far surpass what we now believe possible. If you would like to know more about the great Archon and his host, about its influence on this planet, and how to overcome this great predatory force, then I suggest the book, Overcoming the Archon Through Alchemy. I will leave a link to the book in the description below.